our meeting today, presentations from our four speakers. I start with Louise Elliot. Louise is a councillor with the Hobart City Council. In speaking out about the critical importance of female-only sports spaces and opportunities, Louise has been subjected to threats, intimidation, and ridicule from her own Hobart City Council colleagues. Louise is also currently being investigated by the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner for communicating the fact that trans women remain biologically male. Now that's a very understated bio that Louise provided me. It doesn't tell us the full horror of what Louise has been subjected to, nor does it indicate how much we're indebted to Louise. Thank you.
Thank you. And when Anna spoke that introduction just then, I actually had a bit of a moment where I was able to reflect on the situation as if it was someone else, and I was shaking my head too at how insane that was. So like Anna said, I'm Louise Elliot. I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister and a friend. And I also happen to be a Hobart City Councillor, but I'm here today in my personal capacity. While I'm pleased to be surrounded by such fabulous women, I wish we weren't here under this situation. I wish we were here celebrating how far we've come, not fighting for women's rights again. If you had said to me 6 months ago I'd be standing here sharing my views and experiences on women's rights and fundamental issues like freedom of expression, I would have looked at you somewhat puzzled. But over 40-odd years I've come to expect the unexpected. Today, I proudly call myself a feminist. Only a couple of years I wouldn't have. Why? Because I was enjoying the warmth of complacency of the women who had come before me, who had braved the cold of inequity. It doesn't seem like long ago that we were living in a reasonably fair and sane world, where at least locally women were overall considered equal. Yes, there was a lot more work to do, things like pay equality, getting women to the top jobs, sharing home responsibilities and managing the pressure of having it all. But overall, women have come a very long way. Fast forward only a short time, and we are quickly going backwards. We've even lost the word that defines our being. A quick lesson. Many of us here are women, and a woman is an adult human female. Over the past few years, I've seen and experienced the snowballing that's created the mess we have here today. I've seen men on the podium of women's sports and said, but that's wrong. That's blatantly unfair. That's unsafe. It's so obviously wrong. How is this being allowed to happen? I've seen cryptic signage in our public change rooms, toilets and showers that sends a stern message. If you're uncomfortable or feel unsafe changing with a man who says he's a woman, you're a bigot. If you will not accept your young daughter, and I have mine here today, if you will not accept your young daughter sharing showers with a man, you're a transphobe. I've spoken to multiple Tasmanian lesbian women who have lost their rare social connection opportunities. Their once a month get together has been gate-crashed by trans men. They now don't go. I've spoken to women who have been raped, molested, sexually assaulted, and those who for cultural reasons need a handful of places in this world away from men. I've listened to Tasmanian women firsthand tell me about their prison experiences and their experiences in shelter environments and the obvious stress that those women are under and the need for vulnerable spaces just for females. I've spoken to a devastated mum in tears telling me how their daughter, who has struggled with mental health issues for many years, has been lost to testosterone injections and her conditions have become far, far worse. I've shook my head in dismay at heartbreaking images of brutal surgeries where massive egos are attempting to create fake penises, fake vaginas and removing healthy breasts. I've seen the spluttering politicians unable to answer the simplest questions like what is a woman? And their responses are both hilarious and deeply disturbing. I've seen wannabe politicians chasing easy votes and joining the groupthink that calls for the erasure of women and calling their removal of rights as progressive, when in fact it is the most backward and harmful ideology our generation has seen. I've interacted with countless people who have forgotten or choose to ignore through peer pressure a fundamental fact. The fact that humans care not to change sex. Our sex is in every cell of our body and our sex matters. So, coming from my experience, When I think about all this, my head starts to spin. Where do we start? I have a young daughter, and it's her safety and the children around us that have broken the camel's back for me. In February, I brought to council a motion that focused on women's safety, privacy and dignity when using council's change room, showers and toilets. The first part of my motion was that the council agree that everyone should feel safe and comfortable using council's change room, showers and toilets. A rather mundane and obvious statement, one would think. Well, we were wrong. This statement lost 9-3. 3/4 of the Hobart City Council voted against that statement. Whilst that's astounding, personally for me it got worse. Part of my motion also asked for the council to agree that as new facilities were built or existing facilities were upgraded, that we would offer 3 communal spaces, male, female and all genders. Under Tasmanian law, a man could still use a female space if he decided in that moment he was a woman, but at least there would be a third option available. And for people who are genuinely troubled with their gender, they'd have the comfort of an all-gender space rather than having to choose from 2 distinct options. A win-win. Unsurprisingly, that motion lost also. What did leave me stunned, however, was the way a fellow councillor acted as I spoke. He was huffing, puffing, eye-rolling, head-shaking, pen-flicking. He looked in pain from what I was saying. When it was his turn to respond to my motion, this newly elected fellow councillor decided it was a good time to personally ridicule me for bringing this to the table. This Labor member with big political aspirations put on a performance. He read from his script and proceeded to call me a clown for daring to bring this issue and solution to council. The chamber was packed full of baby pink and blue be kind types and who all laughed along. He later confirmed that he was intentionally letting his disdain show through his body language and that his behaviour was just a bit of political theatre. As I spoke about women's rights, safety and our needs, he performed and called me a clown. So that was February. Only weeks later, I feared for the safety for the first time in the city I've grown up in. In March, I was one of several local Tasmanian women who spoke at the Hobart Let Women Speak event. Women spoke about growing up as lesbians, advocating for gay rights, and their experience with males being sent to women's prisons. They spoke about the need for female-only shelters and their concerns with children being prescribed powerful drugs and undergoing irreversible surgeries. The personal experience of rape and abuse and a desperate plea to repeal Tasmania's self-ID laws was another brazen women's message. I shared my view that it's dangerous and unfair for women to have to compete in sport against biological males, and that it's insane to have a law that can allow a man to declare he's a woman and only moments later be showering with girls. I also spoke about name-calling, threats and intimidation being directed at women who dare to raise an issue, question or hold different views. As I spoke about these attacks, this is exactly what the attendees and I experienced. Hundreds of protesters organised by Equality Tasmania descended on our event. They left their permit area and a large aggressive mob encircled and trapped us, and they screamed and hurled abuse at us for over 2 hours. They taunted us, spat on us and physically and verbally intimidated us. A lady in her 50s grabbed my arm and said she was scared. I turned to her and I lied. I said, "You're okay, we're okay, it's okay." I was lying. I wasn't sure about that at all. I was bewildered at the police for allowing the mob to entrap us. Women were coming asking for me to do something, pleading with me, as if I had some sway. I had nothing. I had asked 4 different police officers on several times and several occasions to please get some safe distance. It was a real pressure cooker. I was surprised but very thankful that it didn't explode, because it would have been us that were trampled. I was shell-shocked for days. I kept replaying the event over and over and never have looked at Hobart the same way again. Days later, in private, Equality Tasmania acknowledged to me personally that the women should have been heard. I appreciated that, but I asked them to publicly declare their disapproval for what had happened and how the crowd had behaved, but they declined. Sadly, I think many of us, if not all of us here, have probably experienced intimidation, abuse, harassment, smears and name-calling for speaking up. For speaking up for what's fair and true, for speaking up for facts, reality, and with a fair and valid perspective. The attacks we're experiencing for not complying, asking questions and thinking independently is a widespread and growing issue. A statement is being issued from the United Nations level. That's how bad things have gotten. I suspect many of you here have seen the statement that's put out by the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls. In her statement, Ms Reem Al-Salim condemns threats and intimidation towards women and girls who express their opinions and beliefs associated with their sex and sexual orientation. She also says that women and girls who advocate for their needs to discuss and for the need to discuss definitions and relationships between sex, gender and gender identity must be able to do so safely. Again, hardly controversial. Given what had happened in my home state, the dangerous scenes at Parliament House and also the appalling conduct in Town Hall, I thought that this statement could be the independent reset and reality check that some councillors and those who think that hashtag be kind, hashtag love wins, hashtag do better is a one-way street. I asked the Council to note the UN statement and to consider it as we develop and update inclusion and diversity related documents. I also asked the Council to agree that women and girls must be able to speak respectively and constructively on sex, gender and gender identity without fear and intimidation. That motion lost 6 to 5. Councillor Ryan Purcell, the man who had called me a clown earlier, intentionally left the room for this agenda item. Of the 6 people who voted against this very fair, straightforward and reasonable request, 4 were women. 4 were women of all colours. They voted against women speaking without fear and intimidation. A current and former Greens member, a former Labor member and a current Liberal member. Astounding. When I spoke at the Let Women Speak event in March, I knew what happened that day was likely chapter 1 of a meaningful book. Sure enough, come May, I received a letter from the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner saying that I'm being investigated for inciting hatred. That's a big claim. I must have done something really terrible. I'm being investigated for inciting hatred for publicly saying that trans women are trans women and remain biological men. I went to grade 7, so I know that fact. I also stated another fact of reality. You cannot be raped with a penis if there is no penis present. Pretty straightforward, I would have thought. Given the absurdity of what I'm facing, I've lawyered up. I know how important this is, not just for me, but for all of us here and beyond. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time someone in Australia is being investigated for inciting hatred and facing the prospect of big fines for telling the truth. This process has been going on since May, and I recently heard from my lawyers that there's no clear time frame around when the matter will be escalated to tribunal or dismissed. On hearing the news that I'm in limbo, I shared a Dylan Mulvaney-style tweet. Day 88 of inciting hatred. 88 was the number of days between me getting the first letter and then being notified from the lawyers that the time frame for resolution was as long as a piece of string. Not long after this tweet, the smear tactics again started. A handful of people with a bias so strong that they lose all objectivity decided that my use of the number 88 was a Nazi call sign. I was sick of the Nazis. My first instinct was, as you did, to laugh. Its ridiculousness and the desperation to find something to be offended by. Then it clicked. Oh yes, of course, this is another attempt to discredit me, to shame me, to silence me. Of course, hashtag be kind. As you can probably appreciate, it's been an eventful few months and I often ask myself if it's worth it. Is speaking up worth it if you're name-called and ridiculed? Is it worth speaking up if you're threatened with legal consequences for saying the truth? Is it worth speaking up if your property gets graffitied, your letterbox ripped off, your garbage tipped at your car? Every time I ask myself this question, the answer is bloody yes. Why? Because women matter. My daughter matters, and all other daughters here and to come matter. Because safety, fairness and truth matters. Because science and reality matters. And freedom of expression is critical. I'll keep speaking the truth because I will not be forced to lie. I'll share my perspective because that's real diversity. Diversity is more than just age and the colour of our skin. Wrapping up, I know there's many reasons for us to feel downtrodden, but I feel very optimistic. The world is starting to wake up. Ordinary, sane people who are playing along to be kind have been pushed way too far. So what can we do from here? We need to lead by example. As hard as it can be, let's model how to disagree without the name-calling and attacks. I find that hard too. The more they name-call and try to smear us, the stronger we become as it highlights their lunacy. We thought women's rights were largely won. Civil societies like us had evolved, and we expressed grief at what happens to women in other countries and what they must endure. But we are not done. We must speak up however we can and whenever we can. Ask your politicians what their views are on things that matter to you. Ask them the obvious questions. As a very low-ranking elected representative, I can tell you that hearing from a community is very powerful. Be loud, but please never compromise your safety. From here, it's critical that we stick together. Look around. There's no doubt many, many things we disagree on, but we believe in safety and fairness for women and children, and there is hardly a better cause to unite us. Thank you.